Hi, my name is Jessica Meekum, and I did my research paper on the homelessness crisis and specifically how being homeless impacts your health. And the main problem that I really found is that this has devolved into a health crisis. In the 2024 annual homelessness report to Congress, they found that there was an 18.1% increase of people who are experiencing homelessness in the US from 2023 to 2024. If you look at the graph, you can see that that gigantic of a spike is not the norm, and that this is becoming like a issue that is escalating very quickly. And also the main problems that really surround this is mischaracterization and ignorance that is common in this. And also, there's been a really big shift away from housing first initiatives in major cities. Housing first is just, the main goal is to just get these people into housing because the research has shown that once you get people into housing, all of their health indicators and, their way of life will just improve. But there's been a shift away from those policies in favor of policing and banishment practices, and that has created a problem that worsens health. And going into this, I thought that using the word unhoused versus a homeless person would be really important. I had seen it online, and I was like, they're like it reduces the stigma of homelessness, like talking about this issue of used unhoused, it won't carry as much stigma. But I think this word has developed the same stigma that homelessness has. And I figured, it's going to make my essay a little clunky. It might make it harder to understand if someone hasn't seen this word before. So I had to shift that. Um, I also thought that social stigma in healthcare would be like a very big reason as to why this population doesn't receive the healthcare that they need. But it turns out that healthcare officials, especially ones that work with this population or work in cities, just want to care for these people and they do care about them. I can't say like on an individual level someone might be biased and refuse health and refuse care and like not want to care about somebody as much, but there's not like a evidence there's not evidence to show that social stigma really impacts these people and the healthcare official like in the healthcare capacity. I also thought that my thesis would be built around the fact that health bills, especially like how high those costs can get, how those would be like a really big reason as to why people lose their housing. But the research shows that housing costs are really the reason for high homelessness rates. The research has shown that once housing cost goes up in an area, so do their homelessness rates. Health bills can contribute to that, but it wasn't the biggest reason, and it wouldn't have been appropriate to base my thesis around that when I had found that housing costs were that big of a reason. But in the end, my essay ended up being about the causes of homelessness, the health risks that are associated with experiencing homelessness, addiction and substance abuse. The debate that surrounds this issue was also important to cover because this impacts policy, which is, the method of housing first. I also talk about why it works. I also talk about why cities stopped using it. And then I also talk about how the current methods that are being used of policing and control just don't work. Law and order does not work in the situation, and it only really worsens the conditions of people who are experiencing homelessness. And the reason I really started to care about this issue was when I was 18, I lived in Hawaii for 10 months. I was a fresh little baby 18-year-old from Issaquah, Washington. And I had my first really like scary interactions with people who experienced homelessness there. I had interactions with them basically every day. Um, my friend in the yellow shirt there, me and her were walking back to campus, and we had a man shit or defecate, sorry, on the street about 5 feet away from us. The girl to the left of her, she had a homeless man try to kick her in the face when we were at a 7-Eleven. These are scary things to go through. I'm sure people who are watching this have also either heard stories like it or have experienced something like that too. And for a long time, I had this like discomfort when it came to seeing people who are experiencing this. I kind of had this disgust. I just had this like feeling of like, can they just go away? Can they please just go get a job? Can't they work harder? Can't they just go away? And I don't want to see them. Can't they go anywhere else? And my point of view really changed on this once I learned about it. And once I started learning about it, I cared about it. I can't make anyone care about this issue. Um, but I think it's important for us to kind of like reflect and, like question where our opinions on this issue comes from, because seeing visible poverty and drug use, having scary interactions or hearing about it, it gives us this like discomfort that we just want to get rid of, and we just want it to go away. And sometimes our brains jump to the conclusion that like these people just have to go away, I don't care how. But then also it brings up this feeling of like, well, they're not worth our tax. I don't want my taxes going to these people. Look at them, they're drug addicts, they're just burdens. And I think that it's important to recognize that a lot of the times that opinion comes from the discomfort of seeing people who are dying right in front of us. Also, oftentimes the police will lie to us um, about these situations, and they continue on this narrative that I just described to you. But ignorance is the main driver of not caring about this issue, and I think once you start to learn about it, you will care. And also, it'd be nice to be able a little selfish motivation for me personally. I would like to be able to walk through Seattle at night. I would like to be able to walk through Seattle and not see a guy shooting up across the street. Personally, so if we get these people into housing and we get them care, we won't have to deal with that anymore, and it'll keep our cities safer and cleaner too. And there's just so many reasons to care about this issue, and it's something that matters a lot to me. Obviously. But my research questions going into this were some that we kind of already discussed already. But I really wanted to know why a person becomes homeless, the health risks associated with it, uh, how the healthcare system kind of puts low income populations at a disadvantage. Not how does not having a home address impact a person? What does it look like when a person experiencing homelessness seeks out healthcare? How does policing of this population impact their health situation? A lot of this I've already kind of covered, but something that was really shocking was how not having a home address impacts a person. Our Fifth Amendment rights, and I think other Bill of Rights too, are really interconnected with property and housing. And so when you don't have that, there's not like your rights are not as easily or as simply protected. And oftentimes we see people who are experiencing homelessness have their rights kind of ignored. And we see oftentimes their belongings get destroyed by police, or they get arrested for loitering, or fined for loitering, not arresting, sorry. But also talking about fines, if you when you're homeless you can't pay your fines. So what happens is eventually you can't pay for them, so a warrant goes out for your arrest. Without a home address you don't have any way to receive mail. You don't, and so you'll never know you have a warrant out for your arrest until you get arrested. That's something that was really shocking. And I think that's one of those privileges that you don't really clock that you have until you lose it. But there's also policing in Seattle is very common. We have banishment practices, which I cover in my research as well. But they basically ban people from certain parts of Seattle, and these areas often contain like important social services. And that was a really shocking thing to learn about happening in Seattle. And they also have them. I don't know. I think they have them in California, but I don't know that for a fact, so I'm not going to say that. But something that I really found when I was, researching this topic, and the opposition to it, there is a narrative that people who don't want taxpayer money to go towards these people, that they're just, as I've said before, like disgusting, like they should just go get jobs, and that they want to be homeless, and that we shouldn't waste city resources on them. But the research really shows that that's just not true. Sure, I'm not going to say every homeless person's a saint. They're not. They're people. A lot of them are drug addicts. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say they're good people. They're just people. They have a fundamental right to things. And people like Ronald Reagan, he set a precedent that the president didn't really have to care about this population. And didn't. He was the president when this epidemic really started, and he, from the start, was uh, very sure that he did not have to care about this population and did not want to. And in San Francisco by Michael Schellenberger, he is a good tool for kind of explaining how the opposing side ignores the research and instead relies on the gut instinct of disgust and discomfort that we feel when we see people openly in poverty and suffering. um, they ro- they're both men who um, just had no interest or have no interest in um, interacting with the research in a serious way. And they're both good tools to point out how people who oppose this idea don't interact with the research and the population and this issue in a serious way. Thank you for watching. I had a lot of fun doing this essay, and it's